good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to The Future is Female. This is the show where we find the extraordinary in every woman. I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Anne Abraham, who is the founder of Lead Women, which is an organization advocating for diversity, equity and inclusion across the corporate sector. Anne, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. I'm really happy that you're here, and I'm curious to know how you got started in this journey. I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe we could begin there, and how you came to be so passionate advocating for DEI, real efforts for DEI in all sectors in corporate Malaysia.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa, for having me on the show. Yeah, so actually I started in the corporate world, very much in the technology space, you know, and in the last couple of years of my stint in the corporate world, I was heading one of the largest technology companies focused on the networking and communication space. And in that capacity as the MD for the organization, that was when I really started getting messages that, you know, it's tough being a woman in a leadership space. There are multiple challenges, and balancing life is tough. And it started to hit me because, you know, you grow up thinking, I'm just lucky to be there. This is an opportunity that came my way. And you never think about these inequities, or you never feel that there has been, because gender was never an issue in my era, right? Not an issue, but never spoken about an issue, right? Never talked about. So that started me thinking a lot about this. And then the whole move towards the national aspirational targets of getting 30% women on corporate boards. And, you know, that was when I started to think maybe I could do something beyond this that could make a difference, bring some change, especially for women, specifically for women. And it was tough for women leaders really at that point in time because you don't see many, right? So that started my thinking, and sure enough, soon after that, I jumped out of the corporate world and said, this is where I want to go, you know. And I think, I guess I found my passion in this space, you know. So since
Which led you to found
Lead Women. Yeah.
Lead Women.
So when I jumped out of it, I said, let me work on trying to increase women representation on the boards, because, you know, when women have authority, have position, power, they can make change happen. And, you know, you cannot change policies, you cannot change mindsets if you don't have the platform to talk about it. So that was when I said, let me get involved in this and let me see how I can drive increased representation. So yes, in 2011, late 2011, early 12, started this journey, set up Lead Women, started to work to really talk about building up women directors, etc. And now 14 years, almost 13 years down the road, in the course of doing this, you know, increasing visibility for women, increasing people's understanding of the issues and the inequities that we see in workplaces and boardrooms, I think it also then brought to picture that there are also other elements of diversity that we need to be looking at, because diversity, equity, inclusion was starting to move at that time. Not so much in Malaysia in those earlier years, but definitely around the globe. We could see there was a focus on people with disabilities. We were looking at ethnicities, we're looking at race, we're looking at age diversities, because it was really a time of fast change, you know, in the corporate sector. And if you look at the most progressive companies out there, they are there because they embraced diversity. They embraced the diverse perspective.
So let's look at kind of the Malaysian context. So because you've been in this space for the last decade and a half, pushing in the corporate sector, how has that conversation evolved? And when you first started looking at increasing representation, particularly for women, where is it now? How far have we come?
We've come a long way. So, you know, in that sense, it kind of makes me feel good that we were all involved in the journey since then. Because when we started, the needle was something like 12% women on boards. 7%, it was hovering on 7% to 12%. And then when this conversation started and people started to sit back and talk about it, and these conversations were raised at very high levels and a very strategic agenda. And today, you know, we are over 30% on the top 100 boards. And the same with the rest of the 900 plus to 1,000 listed cos on Bursa Malaysia. So it does show that, you know, when you put an effort and you put focus and you bring the agenda to a strategic level of discussion and you have the right stakeholders, change will happen.
Right. So the conversation, as you pointed out earlier, it very much focused on, when we think about diversity, we think very much on gender equality, increasing representation of women within leadership positions in the corporate sector. But how has it changed? How has DEI expanded to include different intersectionalities of diversity?
Interesting question, you know, Melissa. So that's true. So when we talked in the early years, it was always about women. Even today, I think some groups still think when we talk DEI, we're talking about women. But I think it has gone beyond that, because it's really now looking at other minority groups. So the whole idea with diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's about embracing the differences, providing the equity so that they can be included and given full potential, right? So it's like bringing everybody to the table and giving everybody an opportunity to hear their voice. So the whole focus for DEI was, don't leave the minority groups out. Even though women were a large segment, but really representing the leadership, they were a minority. So we needed to give them that voice. But today, the thinking has gone beyond. We are seeing many of the organizations are looking at other minority groups and giving them opportunity. And that is PWDs, people with disabilities. There are also, you know, visible disabilities and invisible disabilities. So there's a whole group of people looking at even neurodiverse talent today. And Petronas is one of the organizations trying to lead the charter on that. And that's been really interesting for us, because when we work with them, they've put a lot of effort in trying to build out that space and understand that space.
Okay,
you know?
Can you give me an example what inclusion would look like for neurodivergence, neurodiversity? How do we think about that? What would that look like in a corporate setting?
Okay. So a lot of this area in this space is new to many. So there are a few organizations that are really trying to champion this. And I think, you know, it doesn't just mean I'll bring the talent on board, right? There are two sides of the whole thing. The talent needs to be provided for, and the people dealing with the talent, working with them, need to understand that as well, right? Otherwise, you know, it will become, again, just a tick in the box. I've got the talent, and that's it. So there's training for the managers, the people who work with them, the ability to have the right technology for them, the environment that they have, the space that they need, depending on the, you know, issues that they encounter in work environment. So it's a lot of investment of time and resource.
Wow.
So you can't just go down the road. And that's why I would understand, you know, if smaller organizations say this is too much for us. It's true, it's too much. So why don't you do small things, you know, in different areas? So have you got gender equality worked out for you? Have you got the ability to bring in multiracial, an organization with multiracial contributions in the organization? Have you got a diversity of age groups in your organization?
Because age as well is an area where we want to look at having diversity, equity, and inclusion. Talk to me about ageism in the corporate sector.
An interesting part.
That is an interesting one.
So it's new. It's starting to gain traction and interest, because there's a whole group of people that are retiring. And today we notice that when people are retiring at 55 and 60, they're still very strong, able-bodied, still right there, you know, with full mental capacity to do so much. And that entire knowledge gets lost if you don't bring that back, right? And we already are struggling with good talent in the corporate sector for Malaysia. So I think Singapore has done that very well. If you look at how they have actually brought in the much older retired group into the workforce again and given opportunity, I think is definitely helping with the workforce and talent. So again, the corporate sector is looking at that again and saying, why don't we retain some of these?
I also think it's interesting to think of kind of gender representation, gender equality and equity with ageism, because many times women of a certain age become invisible almost to management and to their potential. And do you see that also happening? Okay.
Yes, very much so.
What are your observations on kind of ageism and gender?
For gender, right? So I think that's why I was so interested when we were talking about getting more women onto the boards, because many of the executive women, senior women, very well, you know, accomplished in so many ways. But once they hit retirement, that's it. We don't see them. They move out and they just disappear.
That's right.
Unlike men, who then have opportunities to get onto boards, to start up businesses and to do so much more. And so when we started to do this, getting more women onto boards, we realized, wow, look at the talent pool out there, you know, so rich in talent and experience. And when we started building out that repository of these women and started to look at opportunities, we can see them bringing a lot of that experience and wealth of knowledge into the boards. And the conversations, I believe, at the board levels changed so much, you know. Today, there's a lot of humanity weaved into that conversation at the board level. We're talking about people, we're talking about talent, we're talking about workspaces, harassment, you know, employee engagement. These are conversations that are real. Because at the board levels also, you know, understanding culture is critical, right? It's a very, very important
It can
part.
sometimes feel kind of clinical to talk about DEI, but when you bring the human aspect into it, that you're essentially talking about real people with real challenges in real life settings, but in a Malaysian setting. So DEI is a concept that originated from the kind of Eurocentric ideas of diversity, inclusion, and equity, inclusion. How do we adapt that and align that to the values and cultural context in Malaysia, but also in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I like that question because we are going to be doing a summit coming up in October, and it's on the 16th and 17th of October, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Summit. But we have themed it Humanity Rebalanced. So when you ask that question, and that's the element that we say is so important, right? Because what is DEI? It is about managing people or addressing the needs or ensuring that everybody gets included, right, in the whole thing. So you're right, it started out in the US and very much around the black community because they were seen as a community that was left behind, right? So it is, when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it is about equalizing the space for all so that they can thrive, they can be included and they have opportunity. So in Malaysia, we don't have a black community, but we have many other aspects of diversity that need to be also addressed. For example, of course, in Asia, on the whole, I would say gender is a huge element. And if you look at Malaysia's ranking in the Gender Equality Index, we are ranked very low, you know. So, and there are many reasons behind that. But one of them we see is lacking of women in leadership positions, in parliamentary positions, and also, of course, you know, being able to get women to come back and participate in the economy. So the focus in Asia is quite different. A lot of it is still going to hover around getting equality for women so that they can have good quality of life in every aspect. But we're also beginning to see that it's moving out into race, into age, because today we have multi-generational workforces, right? And being able to actually bring the young in and not have stereotypes that if you're young, you can't lead, or if you're young, you don't sit on the board. If you're old, you don't know technology, so you shouldn't be in these spaces.
There are a lot of stereotypes,
a lot of hidden stereotypes that impact people's mobility and access to you know, to new areas that they could possibly grow in. So Asia has its whole different set of needs at this point, and it's okay because it's still doing diversity, equity, inclusion, but focusing on very different aspects of diversity.
So if we were to take that and put it into practice, when you talk to businesses and organizations, regardless of the size, big and small, what do they tell you about how they are trying to adapt to this or adopt this? What are the challenges they face in trying to be truly diverse and equitable and be inclusive to all?
So different challenges at different levels of companies, types of companies, etc. For the larger, bigger ones, especially the multinationals, it's a lot more straightforward. But they also have their challenges. So as they try to bring down global policies, right? And when you come into local jurisdictions, it's difficult in some areas.
Because there's no one size fits all for every market. Right?
And there's some elements that we don't want to deal with at this point in time, right? Like the LGBTQ segment, which is very big in the US, etc., is something we are not ready even to discuss this at this point in time. And if you look at Thailand, just our neighbor, is very accepting of this, you know. So we're going to allow the countries to really determine where they want to focus. And I think we should respect the law of the land in that sense as we work through diversity, equity, inclusion. It's got to be what's best for everyone. So there's so much to deal with. You know, we don't have to go down areas that we are not ready or not prepared to even discuss. So in the companies we choose, so the global companies have that to deal with. So what can we do and what can't we do in certain organizations? Where should the priorities be? And then let's focus on the priorities. For the smaller companies, not many of them are ready for it, but we can see pockets of it coming through right now. For sure, the gender element is something everybody's talking about.
Right.
But my only hope is that it doesn't become tokenism.
Okay.
And it becomes real inclusion that we are working towards.
So what do you tell them? So when you say there are pockets of it and there's still some maybe resistance or reluctance to adopt true DEI practices, how do you make the case then to businesses to adopt it? Because some of them may still view this as kind of a HR practice, right? Like, as you pointed out earlier, hire the right person, tick that box.
with the whole ESG framework as well coming down, you know, you've got to have so many % women, you've got to this, you've got to that, the human rights aspects of things, etc. So really it has to come, like you say, from a business case, right? Okay. Why do you want to do it?
Is there a business case?
Yes, for sure. I mean, and you've seen so many research pieces that have come out and studies that have come out that have correlated, you know, increased diversity and inclusion to much better business results, quantifiable and as well as qualitative value that it brings. So there is a very clear business case that, and we can see it as well, right? The most progressive companies are so diverse. Look at our big tech companies there. They hire people wherever they come from the world, as long as they bring the right talent, we are happy to bring you in.
Okay, so beyond the kind of ESG and being part of kind of the global supply chain, who is watching if companies truly walk the DEI talk? Is it investors? So who's watching? Who's keeping companies accountable?
Yeah. So I think eventually a lot of the external stakeholders are going to do that for these companies, right? So you have, in the case of the public listed companies, a lot of it is investors, right? Investors are going to be watching to see, are you doing the right thing? Are you really transparent? Do you have the right policies in place and things like that? And also, of course, harassment, bullying, etc., comes out quite clearly in workspaces, and we've seen a lot of companies go through those kind of issues. For the smaller companies, if they want to be a part of that global supply chain, they're going to have to need to build this into their practices. Okay. They're going to have to put certain policies in place like discrimination, gender equality policies, etc., anti-harassment policies. So they're going to have to start raising the standards for themselves in order to be, and everybody is going to be part of that global supply chain at one point in time, right? So I think external pressures will force a lot of companies. And for the listed cos as well, apart from investors, you also have Securities Commission watching and setting some of the governance requirements. You've got Bursa Malaysia watching for the listed cos as well. So yeah, it is going to get water leveled out over time.
Do you think it ought to be more voluntary as opposed to it being regulated and institutionalized?
It will be something we hope will happen, that, you know, companies will have their own, you know, locus of control internally and say this is what we want to do because it is the right thing to do over time. So you've seen also in countries when early days of gender equality, there were quotas being set. You know, and there was a lot of pushback on numbers, right? And so it had its good and its bad. In some countries, because of the quota, we are beginning to see traction move and change. And even in Malaysia, even though we didn't have a quota, but we had a very strong aspirational target, just by that 30% being thrown around everywhere, everybody was saying, okay, are you 30%? Are you not? Are you 30%? And so it does help people move that needle.
Yes,
you know?
for sure.
So it's going to take different approaches to do it.
So if it is going to be internally motivated, what do we need from diversity allies to make sure that there is progress constantly?
This, I think, has to be part of the culture, and it has to come from the top, from the board level, from the C level. There has to be belief in it that that's the way we want it, and we're going to ingrain this into our culture. It's going to be something we measure, we reward, we recognize. It's going to be something we also want to track and monitor to make sure the value is continuously being seen, you know. So there's no point saying I'm 70% women, but if it doesn't translate to business value, at the end of the day, it won't sustain, right? So it has to be done holistically, is what we see. You know?
So talk to me about the Lead Women Summit that's coming up. So Lead Women's hosting APAC's first ever Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Summit in October. What outcomes are you hoping that you can achieve with the summit?
Yeah, so, you know, since COVID, we haven't done anything. I was just having that conversation with you. And a lot of things kind of came to awakening during COVID, right? We're beginning to see the mental health is a big issue. We're beginning to see that flexibility does help. It puts people in a very different space. And so we're beginning to see that there is a need for us to weave back that humanity into the way we lead. It's got to be human leadership at the end of the day, right? So you will see our summit is themed Humanity Rebalanced, because we want to bring that element into all the discussions. We thought it's important for us to put together one big landmark kind of diversity, equity, inclusion summit to really state where we are, what we are doing with it, and what does it really mean, you know? And so you will see that the summit agenda has been thought through in such a way that we wanted it to be a discussion at national level. So you have the ASEAN Business Advisory Council going to be talking a little bit about how they want to interweave diversity, equity, inclusion within the communities as well. We're going to talk about it from the banker's perspective. We're going to talk about it from the corporate perspective as well. So we're hoping that, you know, people come, one is they take away knowledge, they see what's happening around the globe, they see the value and the change that we're trying to bring with diversity, equity, inclusion. And the second day is very much about how do you do it then? How do you bring inclusion into organizations? What kind of strategies? And with the advent of all generative technology coming in and multiple other complexities in the workplace, how do you still keep that human element a part of everything that we do? You know?
Which is quite interesting, because as the more we progress, there will always be pushback. And we see this happening in the West as well. There's been a pushback against progress made by DEI initiatives.
Yes.
How do we think about that, and kind of where do we go from here?
And that's one of the questions we're going to have on the first day of our summit at the very end.
So interesting.
We're going to have a debate that talks about what's next for DEI. Should it pivot? Should it progress? Because that's where we are seeing a lot of thought going. But if you ask me, I really feel that whichever direction we take, the end goal is the same. You know, what do we want to achieve with diversity, equity, inclusion? We want to achieve equality for all. We want to give an opportunity for all to thrive, and no groups get left behind, you know. And it comes back to really about leadership from the day old. You know, the whole idea about leadership is to take care of your people. You know, leaders always talk about people as my asset, but really, the people as my asset part gets put aside, and let's drive profit, right? So we think today people, the only thing holding back many from this is diversity is discomfort. When you bring the diversity into play.
Is that what is fueling this pushback against DEI?
I feel
discomfort.
You know, some of it is discomfort, and some of it is, it wasn't rooted in very strong fundamentals then, if it can so easily get toppled, right? Because the end goal hasn't shifted. Where you want to go with this, whatever you call it, at the end of the day, whether it's DEI or something else, it comes back to the same thing about equality and giving people opportunity. And I think that will never change, right? So I don't understand why there's so much disruption in just having that term diversity, equity, inclusion in some parts of the world today, because I feel the fundamentals were not there, or people didn't believe in the real meaning and goal of DEI. You know, these things will happen, but for the fact that they're thinking it doesn't work, you know, some places feel it doesn't work. So I think we need to go back and rewind and say, why did we even start this? There was a reason, right? And the whole idea is, one is it's discomfort, two is the ability to accept that difference, and then be able to embed that and take it forward. So it's a long haul, really. DEI is a long haul. You can't do it in 1 month, 1 year, 3 years. It's going to be almost a lifetime of building that and institutionalizing that into organizations. Right. And if you want to build sustainable organizations, you just have to be there for the long haul.
Well, in the minute that we have left, the time has flown by. Can I just ask you what you would like us to take away with us tonight? Because I think, you know, while you pointed out it is important that these initiatives be pushed and championed by those at the top, to make it successful requires everyone's buy-in.
Yeah.
And that includes all of us in our workplaces, in our communities. What would you like the audience to take away tonight about the importance of being a DEI advocate for yourself and for others? Yeah.
So I think, just going back to the simplicity of DEI, what is it? It's basically embracing people and ensuring that we are able to live with the differences, accept the differences, and harness that value of difference, right? It's so rich, the perspectives. And don't get, what should I say, waylaid by what does it take? It's there's so much to do, and
it feels overwhelming.
Yeah, just overwhelming.
Yeah.
You can do little things that make big change. That's what I think, And so understand DEI, embrace the differences, and you will see the value really translate into your organizations and keep them sustainable for a long time to come.
And it's been so invigorating talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing about your work and your passion. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
That's all we have for you on this episode of The Future is Female. I'm Melissa Idris signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.